A woman sits quietly in seat 14F. Nobody looks at her twice. The flight attendants walk past without noticing. When the Boeing 737 starts shaking and the pilots lose control, she walks to the cockpit and reveals a secret nobody expected. Now she must land this dying aircraft or everyone dies. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The morning sun shined through the big windows at Denver Airport. People walked slowly toward Gate B-27. They carried bags and coffee cups. Everyone looked tired. It was just another normal day of flying. Sarah Mitchell walked among these people. She was in her late 30s with short dark hair tied in a ponytail. She wore jeans and a plain navy sweater. She looked like everyone else. Nobody noticed her. She scanned her phone at the gate and boarded Flight 1847 to Seattle. The flight attendants smiled at everyone. When Sarah walked past, they looked at her for 1 second, then looked at the next person. She was forgettable. She was invisible. Sarah found her window seat, 14F. She put her backpack in the overhead bin and sat down with a book. A businessman took the aisle seat. He opened his laptop immediately. He did not look at Sarah. She was nobody to him. A flight attendant named Jessica walked through the cabin checking seat belts. She stopped at row 14 for just a moment. "Can I get you anything before we take off?" Jessica asked with a smile. Sarah shook her head politely. "I'm fine, thank you." Jessica walked away. She would not remember Sarah's face. Sarah was just another quiet passenger. The airplane pushed back from the gate. The businessman looked over at Sarah. "Headed home or traveling for work?" he asked politely. Sarah smiled a little. "Just visiting family," she said. The businessman nodded and went back to his laptop. He probably thought she was a teacher or office worker. It would never enter his mind that the quiet woman next to him had once commanded F-16 fighter jets. That she had flown over 3,000 hours in military aircraft. That other pilots called her Viper. What nobody on Flight 1847 knew was that Sarah had spent 15 years as one of the best fighter pilots in the United States Air Force. She had graduated top of her class at the Air Force Academy. She had flown combat missions over dangerous territory. She had handled emergencies that would have killed other pilots. She had once landed an F-16 when hydraulics failed and fire warnings screamed in her ears. She had left the military 3 years ago. She wanted to stop the constant deployments. But she had carefully hidden all connections to that past life. She never mentioned her military service. She never wore anything that showed her background. She did not want anyone to know. The Boeing 737 climbed smoothly through 20,000 feet. The seatbelt sign turned off. Passengers unbuckled. Flight attendants started preparing drinks. Sarah stayed in her seat with her book. But her eyes were not really reading the words. Old habits die hard. Even after 3 years of civilian life, she found herself automatically scanning the aircraft. Listening to engine sounds. Feeling the subtle movements of the airframe. The businessman next to her fell asleep. Behind her, a young mother entertained a restless toddler. Across the aisle, a teenage girl scrolled through her phone. It was a completely normal flight. A cross-section of ordinary American life at 37,000 feet. Sarah had flown on dozens of commercial flights since leaving the Air Force. Each time she struggled with the same feeling. The lack of control. In a fighter jet, she was in command. But here, she was just cargo. A passenger, powerless, invisible. In the cockpit, Captain Robert Hayes and First Officer Amanda Chen ran through their checks with easy confidence. Hayes had been flying for 22 years with over 15,000 hours in his logbook. Most of those in Boeing 737s. First Officer Chen was newer to United Airlines, with only 3 years at the company. But she had proven herself as capable and conscientious. Hayes trusted her completely. The flight was going perfectly. Clear skies stretched ahead. Light winds meant smooth air. They would arrive in Seattle 5 minutes ahead of schedule. Denver Center, United 1847, level at 37,000 feet, Chen radioed. United 1847, roger that, the controller replied. Everything was normal. Perfect. The kind of flight pilots would not even remember. The first warning came without notice. It was 38 minutes into the flight. A warning light turned on. A soft chime sounded. Both pilots noticed immediately. "What have we got?" Hayes asked casually. Single warnings were usually minor. Chen checked the engine display. "Oil pressure dropping on engine 2, she reported. Hayes leaned forward. The oil pressure gauge had fallen from 45 to 38 pounds. And it was still dropping. "Pull out the checklist," Hayes said. Chen reached for the quick reference handbook. But suddenly, 2 more warning lights came on. New warnings appeared on the screen. "Hydraulic pressure low, System A," Chen called out. Her voice was tighter now. "And fuel imbalance warning." Hayes felt real concern. Multiple unrelated systems failing at once was not normal. Then the aircraft shuddered violently. The whole airframe rattled. In the cabin, passengers gasped. Some grabbed armrests. Drink spilled. Sarah's head snapped up from her book. Her body became instantly alert. That vibration was wrong. It indicated structural or mechanical damage, not just turbulence. Her eyes went to the window, scanning the wing and engine for damage, fire, or leaking fluid. In the cockpit, Hayes and Chen faced cascading warnings. The engine vibration indicator jumped into the red zone. The flight display showed strange readings. Warning tones sounded everywhere. "Talk to me, Amanda," Hayes said, keeping his voice calm. "What's our priority?" Chen scanned the displays, trying to follow multiple procedures. New warnings kept appearing faster than she could read them. "Engine 2 is in the red. We need to shut it down," she said. "But we have electrical faults. And hydraulic system A pressure just dropped to 0. She paused. "Captain, these failures are not related. We're looking at multiple independent failures at the same time." Hayes reached for the radio. "Denver Center, United 1847, declaring an emergency. We have multiple system failures. Need immediate vectors for nearest suitable airport." The controller responded professionally. "United 1847, roger. Nearest airport is Grand Junction Regional. Heading 225, distance 60 miles. Descend to flight level 240. All traffic is being cleared." Hayes shut down engine 2 following memory items. But the vibration did not stop. Something was mechanically wrong with the airframe itself. "We need the dual hydraulic failure checklist," Chen said. But new warnings appeared. "Captain, fire warnings from cargo hold. An electrical system just shed main AC buses." They both understood. They were not dealing with a normal emergency. This was something impossible. Multiple failures that should not happen. Hayes made a difficult decision. "Amanda, go brief the senior flight attendant. Tell Jessica we may have to evacuate on landing. If we make it to landing. I need the cabin prepared for worst case." Chen stared at him. She understood. He was admitting he did not know if he could save this aircraft. She unbuckled and moved toward the cockpit door. In the cabin, passengers were truly frightened. The vibration got worse. A grinding shudder came every few seconds. The aircraft was descending. Some passengers cried quietly. Others sat frozen with white knuckles. The businessman beside Sarah was awake now, his face pale. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Is this normal?" Sarah did not answer. Her eyes tracked every sensation, every sound. The vibration pattern, the smell of burning insulation. The way the aircraft pulled to the right. Her fighter pilot's mind assembled a picture of what must be happening in the cockpit. She knew this was not a situation that standard procedures would solve. First Officer Chen came out and talked intensely with Jessica. Sarah watched Jessica's face go pale. Chen gestured showing descent and emergency preparation. Then Chen went back to the cockpit. Jessica picked up the microphone with trembling hands. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing technical difficulties. The captain has decided to divert to the nearest airport. Please return to seats. Fasten seatbelts tightly and review safety cards. Flight attendants, prepare cabin for emergency landing." The cabin erupted. Crying became louder. Voices rose in fear. Flight attendants moved urgently, checking belts and securing items. Sarah looked out at the rocky mountain terrain below. She calculated based on descent rate and direction. Grand Junction was logical. But depending on what was wrong, they might not make it. She made a decision. One that would expose her carefully hidden identity. But her conscience would not let her avoid it. She unbuckled and stood up. "Ma'am, you need to stay seated," a flight attendant called out. Sarah held up a calming hand but kept moving toward the cockpit. "I need to speak to the captain. It's important." The flight attendant, David, moved to block her. "You cannot approach the cockpit. Federal regulations are clear. Please return to your seat." Sarah stopped but did not back away. Her eyes locked onto his with intensity. "I'm a pilot," she said quietly with unmistakable authority. "Fighter pilot. 15 years Air Force. Over 3,000 hours in tactical aircraft. Whatever is happening up there, I might be able to help. Let me talk to them." David stared at her. His training said nothing about this situation. But something in Sarah's eyes made him hesitate. "Wait here," he said finally. He knocked on the cockpit door in a specific pattern. The door opened. David gestured back at Sarah. After 30 seconds, the door opened wider. First Officer Chen appeared, stress visible on her face. "You're a pilot?" Chen asked tightly. Sarah nodded. "Air Force. Retired 3 years ago. F-16s mostly, some F-15 time. I've handled emergencies commercial training doesn't cover. I might help." Chen studied her for a moment. "Wait," she said, then disappeared. Sarah heard urgent conversation and warning tones overlaying radio communications. Chen reappeared. "Captain wants to talk to you. Come on." Sarah entered the cockpit. Her eyes immediately scanned the panels, taking in the full scope of what Hayes faced. What she saw was terrifying. Multiple red warnings. Engine 2 shut down. Engine 1 running with abnormal parameters. Hydraulic system A at 0. System B fluctuating. The aircraft shuddering with structural damage vibration. Captain Hayes turned to look at her, his face strained. "You're a fighter pilot?" he asked hoarsely. Sarah moved closer, bracing against the console as another shudder hit. "Yes, sir, call sign Viper. 15 years tactical aviation, multiple combat deployments, extensive emergency experience including damaged aircraft." "What's your situation?" Hayes gestured at the panel with a shaking hand. "Multiple independent system failures. Shut down engine 2 due to oil pressure and vibration, but vibration got worse. Lost hydraulic system A completely, system B degrading. Fire warnings from cargo hold we can't confirm or fight. Cargo suppression failed. Electrical shed main AC buses. We're on backup power. Nothing explains simultaneous failures across unrelated systems. Sarah's mind worked through the problem systematically. How long since failure started? Hayes glanced at the clock. 8 minutes. 8 minutes, and this many cascading failures meant catastrophic damage. Probably structural, possibly from uncontained engine failure sending debris through critical areas. "Do you still have flight control?" she asked. Hayes nodded. "So far. But if we lose hydraulic B, we drop to manual reversion. This aircraft becomes barely controllable. Landing with manual reversion is nearly impossible even in perfect conditions." Sarah looked at the navigation display. "How far to Grand Junction?" 43 miles, Chen answered. "We're lined up for runway 35, but only descending 1,000 feet per minute. I'm afraid to increase speed with this vibration." Sarah calculated. At current rate, maybe 15 to 18 minutes before landing. But she felt through her feet and heard in the airframe that they did not have 15 minutes. Something structural would fail catastrophically soon. "Captain Hayes, with respect, you won't make Grand Junction," she said quietly. "Whatever's causing this vibration will fail before we get there. We need a closer option. Something we can reach in 5 minutes or less." Hayes stared at her, struggling between hope and despair. "There's nothing closer. Grand Junction is nearest with runways long enough and emergency services." Sarah looked out the windscreen, scanning terrain. Mountains, valleys, snow patches. Then she saw it. A long straight line cutting through a valley, maybe 20 miles ahead. "What's that?" she asked, pointing. Chen leaned forward. "Interstate 70. Runs through Glenwood Canyon." Hayes shook his head immediately. "You can't be suggesting landing a Boeing 737 on a highway. That's not realistic. Not survivable." Sarah turned to face him directly. Her voice was calm but carried absolute authority. "Captain, I'm not suggesting. I'm telling you it's your only option. You have maybe 5 minutes before this aircraft comes apart. That highway is clear, straight, and wide enough if we come in at the right angle. I've landed damaged aircraft in worse conditions." "On a highway?" Hayes demanded, his voice rising. Sarah shook her head. "On runways with no tower, no lights, no guidance, while taking enemy fire with failing hydraulics and barely responding controls. I've brought home F-16s that had no right to fly. I know what damaged aircraft can and cannot do. This cannot make Grand Junction. But I can put it on that highway and save everyone if you let me." Hayes looked at Chen, who stared at Sarah with hope and terror mixed. The aircraft shuddered harder. A new warning sounded as hydraulic B dropped another 10%. They were out of time. Hayes knew it. Every instinct screamed not to hand control to a stranger. But he could see they would not make the airport. "What do you need?" he asked, the words like broken glass. Sarah was already sliding into the jump seat, her eyes scanning instruments with combat pilot intensity. "I need you to talk to ATC. Declare we're landing on Interstate 70. Tell them to stop all traffic both directions and clear the area. First Officer Chen, handle radio communications. Read checklists. Manage systems I'm not controlling. Captain Hayes, stay in left seat but I'm taking control. Keep hands on yoke as backup in case I need you. But I'm flying. Understood?" Hayes nodded slowly, feeling command shift in an unfamiliar way. "Okay. You've got the aircraft. But if I tell you to hand back control, you do it immediately. This is still my cockpit." Sarah met his eyes with complete professional respect. "Agreed. Now let's save this aircraft." She gripped the control column, feeling the vibration and degraded hydraulic authority. "I have the aircraft," she announced formally. "You have the aircraft," Hayes confirmed, his hands shadowing her movements. Chen was already on radio. Denver Center, United 1847. We cannot make Grand Junction. Request immediate closure of Interstate 70 both directions, vicinity of Glenwood Canyon. We intend to land on the highway. Shocked silence from the controller. Then, United 1847, say again your intentions. Chen repeated the request. United 1847, Roger. I understand you intend to land on Interstate 70. Notifying Colorado State Patrol and Emergency Services now. Be advised, I show traffic on that segment. Will take several minutes to clear. Tell them we don't have several minutes, Sarah said, her hands reconfiguring displays for visual flying. Maybe 2 minutes before structural failure. They do whatever they can, but we're landing regardless. Chen relayed this. The controller's grim response, United 1847, understood. All emergency services notified. Altimeter 30.12, winds 280 at 15 gusting 22. Cleared to land any surface. Pilot's discretion. Sarah banked left smoothly despite degraded controls, lining up on the highway centerline. Through the windscreen, she saw the pavement ribbon ahead. Tiny specks of cars and trucks still traveling, unaware a commercial airliner was about to land among them. She deployed speed brakes to increase descent rate, ignoring the increased vibration. Chen, PA announcement. Tell passengers to assume crash positions in 60 seconds. Be honest but calm. Tell them we're attempting emergency landing and they must be prepared for impact. Chen took the microphone, steadied herself, then spoke. This is First Officer Chen. We are making an emergency landing. In 60 seconds, I will tell you to assume crash positions. When I give that command, bend forward, grab your ankles, stay down until complete stop. Crew, prepare for emergency landing. In the cabin, pandemonium, people crying, screaming, praying. Flight attendants moved through the aisle, physically pushing passengers into brace position, their own fear visible but training holding them together. Sarah tuned out everything except aircraft and highway. For miles out, descending through 6,000 feet, ground speed too high at 230 knots. She needed to slow but couldn't deploy full flaps, asymmetric hydraulic failure might cause control loss. She'd come in fast and hard, faster than any commercial landing should be. But she'd done this before in fighters. The physics would work if executed perfectly. 3 miles out. She could see individual cars. Some pulling over, alerted by radio or seeing the massive aircraft descending. Others still moving, oblivious. Sarah knew with cold certainty she couldn't avoid all of them. She'd hit something, caused damage, possibly deaths on ground. But the alternative was mountainside crash, killing everyone aboard with certainty. Captain, call out airspeed and altitude, she said steadily. Hayes began rhythmic count. 220 knots, 5,000 feet. 215 knots, 4,500 feet. 2 miles out. The highway filled the windscreen. Sarah saw canyon walls on either side. She'd thread this aircraft through a gap, leaving maybe 50 feet clearance on each wingtip. The vibration was constant now, grinding shudder she felt in her teeth. Something very close to letting go. When it did, they'd have seconds before the aircraft became unflyable. Chen, brace announcement now, Sarah commanded. Chen's voice, sharp and urgent, brace, brace, brace. 1 mile. Sarah dropped landing gear. Heavy thunk as wheels extended and locked. Drag increased dramatically, slowing the aircraft but worsening shudder. Hydraulic B dropped to 20%. Flight controls became mushy, responding slowly. She added power to the remaining engine, using thrust to help control descent, walking a razor's edge between too fast and too slow. 500 feet, Hayes called, voice strained. 400 feet. 300 feet. Cars pulling desperately to shoulders. Some drivers panicked, stopping in middle lanes. Sarah aimed for widest clear section, accepting her wings would hit things, knowing she must protect the fuselage and cabin where 153 people hunched in crash positions, lives depending on her skill. 200 feet. 150 feet. 100 feet. The Boeing 737 dropped below canyon walls. Sarah could see pavement texture, painted lines, repair patches. She pulled back on the yoke, raising the nose, bleeding speed as the aircraft entered ground effect. Main wheels hit pavement at 160 knots with screech of tires and violent bounce throwing everyone forward against seatbelts. Sarah shoved thrust levers to idle, deployed full speed brakes. Aircraft slammed back down, staying down this time. The noise was catastrophic. Metal screaming, tires exploding. Roar of reverse thrust from single engine creating asymmetric deceleration trying to yaw the aircraft off pavement. Sarah fought controls with every ounce of strength, using rudder and differential braking to keep centered on highway, even as left wing dipped and hit concrete barrier, sending up sparks and tearing metal. The impact tore off outboard wing section and winglet, debris tumbling behind in destruction trail. A semi-truck appeared ahead, driver frozen in terror watching Boeing 737 bearing down. Sarah aimed for the gap right of truck. Her right wingtip passed with inches to spare, but left wing caught the trailer, ripping it open like paper. Impact caused aircraft to yaw violently left. For a moment, Sarah thought they'd roll. But she mashed right brake pedal to floor and added thrust burst, using raw force to muscle aircraft back toward highway center. Down to 80 knots now, still decelerating but surrounded by chaos. More debris breaking off. Sarah smelled burning rubber and hydraulic fluid. She saw passenger car ahead, mother with 2 children visible through windshield, faces white with terror. No room to avoid, no time for anything but prayer. At last second, mother swerved off highway down embankment. Car tilted dangerously but stayed upright. Aircraft thundered past with feet to spare. 60 knots. 50 knots. Sarah felt aircraft dying beneath her hands, systems giving up one by one. But they were slowing. Still on pavement, somehow still together. At 30 knots, nose gear collapsed with grinding crunch. Nose slammed down onto pavement in spark spray. They slid forward another 100 yards, friction bringing them to final grinding stop. 3 seconds of complete silence except for cockpit alarms and hissing hydraulic fluid. Then Sarah's voice cut through the shock. Evacuate. Get everyone out now. She was already out of jump seat, moving to help Hayes and Chen sitting frozen in disbelief at being alive. She grabbed Hayes by shoulder and shook him. Captain, evacuate the aircraft. Get your people out before something catches fire. Hayes snapped back to awareness. He grabbed PA microphone. Evacuate, evacuate, evacuate. Use all exits. Leave everything. Get away from aircraft. Flight attendants through open doors, deploying emergency slides. Passengers stumbled toward exits in controlled panic. Training finally having purpose as they jumped onto slides, tumbling to highway pavement. Sarah helped Hayes from his seat, physically pushed him toward cockpit door. Go. Get yourself out. Hayes stumbled into cabin, joining passenger flow toward exits. Chen was behind him but paused, looking back at Sarah. Thank you, she said, voice breaking with emotion. You saved us. You saved everyone. Sarah nodded, face showing no satisfaction, only grim focus. The job wasn't done until everyone was safe. She moved through cabin, checking each row. She found elderly man frozen in fear, physically lifted him from seat and guided him to exit. She was last person in aircraft. Standing at forward exit door, looking back at empty cabin. At scattered phones, bags, personal items left behind in escape rush. Through windows, she saw passengers running from aircraft. Flight attendants counting heads, trying to establish order on highway where hundreds of people mixed with stopped cars and approaching emergency vehicles. Sarah jumped onto emergency slide, rode down to pavement, rolled to her feet, jogged away from aircraft to safe distance. Only then did she turn and look at what they'd done. The Boeing 737 sat in middle of Interstate 70. Nose crumpled against pavement. Left wing torn and damaged. Debris scattered behind for half-mile. But it was substantially intact. And as Sarah scanned groups of passengers on shoulder being checked by arriving paramedics, she saw people injured but alive. All of them alive. Captain Hayes found her in the crowd. When their eyes met, she saw something beyond gratitude. Recognition of what she'd done, of expertise required to bring that aircraft down in one piece, of reality that every person here owed their life to a woman they hadn't known existed 45 minutes ago. He approached, surrounded by flight attendants and passengers beginning to understand who saved them. When he spoke, his voice carried across highway loud enough for dozens to hear. Everyone needs to understand something. This woman is why you're alive. I'm a pilot with 22 years experience and I couldn't have done what she just did. She's a fighter pilot. Combat veteran. She flew that aircraft when I'd given up hope. Sarah held up a hand, uncomfortable with attention. But Hayes wasn't done. I want everyone here to know her name. He looked at her directly. What's your name? Sarah met his eyes, saw he needed this. Needed to give her recognition that procedures would never formally allow. Sarah Mitchell, she said quietly. Former Captain, United States Air Force. Call sign Viper. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. People surged forward to thank her, touch her arm, shake her hand, or simply look at the face of the person who saved them. Sarah accepted their gratitude with quiet dignity. But inside she felt the weight of what happened settling on her shoulders. She'd saved 153 lives today. But she'd also revealed herself in a way that could never be taken back. The anonymity she'd carefully constructed was gone. Destroyed in 8 minutes and 13 seconds it took to bring a dying Boeing 737 down on a highway through a canyon. At the edge of her skill and the limit of what was physically possible. Investigators would later determine that an uncontained engine 2 failure occurred. A turbine blade broke free from a microscopic defect. The blade punched through engine casing at high speed, sending debris through the fuselage. The debris severed critical hydraulic lines, cut electrical bundles, damaged structural members, all in catastrophic cascade that should have made aircraft uncontrollable. The NTSB concluded that Hayes and Chen did everything right according to training. But their training was inadequate for the situation faced. The official report noted that the only reason everyone survived was because a passenger with fighter pilot experience took control and executed a landing no commercial pilot was trained to attempt. The report included recommendations for new training procedures. For better recognition of when standard approaches wouldn't work. For systems to identify passengers with relevant emergency expertise. 1 year after the emergency landing, United Airlines hosted a reunion of Flight 1847 passengers. They rented a hotel ballroom near Denver Airport. All 153 survivors were invited. Along with the crew, the air traffic controllers, the emergency responders. Sarah arrived early, feeling nervous in a way she never felt in a cockpit. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a sweater, much like what she had worn on the flight. She stood near the back of the room as people filtered in. She watched passengers arrive. Many she recognized from that day, though she had never learned most of their names. The businessman who had sat beside her entered with his wife and teenage son. He had told Sarah in an email that he had quit his high-stress job after the emergency. He now worked fewer hours and spent more time with his family. The experience had changed his priorities completely. The young mother came in holding both her children's hands. The same children who had been in that car on the highway, the ones who had swerved away just in time. She saw Sarah and immediately walked over, tears already in her eyes. "I never got to properly thank you," the mother said. "You saved my babies. You saved everyone's babies." Sarah felt her own throat tighten with emotion. You saved your own children, she replied. You had the presence of mind to swerve away. That was your courage, not mine. Captain Hayes and First Officer Chen arrived together. They had flown many flights together since that day. Their bond had been forged in crisis. When they saw Sarah, they came straight over. Hayes shook her hand firmly. Chen hugged her. How are you both doing? Sarah asked. Hayes smiled. Better. It took a while. I had some nightmares. Some anxiety about flying. But my therapist helped. And honestly, knowing that you were there, that we had your expertise when we needed it most, that helped too. Chen nodded in agreement. I tell people that story all the time now. About how you can never judge who someone is by what they're wearing or where they're sitting. About how expertise can come from the most unexpected places. The flight attendants gathered around Sarah too. Jessica, David, and 3 others who had been working that day. They had all received commendations for their professional handling of the evacuation. But they were quick to credit Sarah. You gave us hope, Jessica said. When you walked to that cockpit with such confidence, such certainty, we knew someone was fighting for us. Someone who knew what they were doing. A large screen at the front of the room began playing a video. News footage from that day, the damaged Boeing 737 sitting on Interstate 70, the debris field stretching behind it, emergency vehicles surrounding it with lights flashing. And passengers standing on the highway shoulder, alive and grateful, many crying with relief. The video showed aerial shots taken from news helicopters. From above, you could see how narrow the canyon was. How little room Sarah had to work with. How impossible the landing looked. How easily it could have ended in catastrophic disaster. Then the video cut to interviews with passengers, filmed in the days after the emergency. One by one, people talked about Sarah. About the moment they realized a passenger was flying the plane. About their terror and their hope, about watching through the cabin windows as the highway rushed up to meet them. The businessman spoke on the video. I thought she was just an ordinary office worker, he said, shaking his head. I thought she was nobody special. I was completely wrong. She was the most special person on that plane. She was exactly who we needed. And none of us knew it until she saved us all. When the video ended, the room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at Sarah. She stood uncomfortably under all those eyes. But she also felt something else. Acceptance, pride, a sense of purpose she had been missing for 3 years. Captain Hayes took the microphone at the front of the room. I want to say something, he announced. I've been flying for 25 years now. I've handled emergencies before. Engine failures, hydraulic problems, medical emergencies. I thought I was prepared for anything. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. But on that day, I was not prepared. I was out of options. I had accepted that we were going to die. All of us. I had no answer for what that aircraft was doing. No procedure that would save us. He looked directly at Sarah. And then this woman walked into my cockpit. This passenger that nobody had noticed. And she told me she could save us. She told me she could land that plane on a highway. And I had to make a choice. Trust my training and procedures and die. Or trust this stranger and maybe live. The room was completely silent now. Every eye was fixed on Hayes. Hardest decision I ever made, he continued. Everything in my training said no. Everything in my experience said it was impossible. But I looked in her eyes and I saw something. Competence, confidence, experience. I saw a pilot who knew exactly what she was doing. So I gave her my aircraft. I put 153 lives in her hands. He paused again, and Sarah could see tears in his eyes. Best decision I ever made. Because she did the impossible. She landed that dying aircraft on a highway through a canyon with winds gusting and debris flying and cars in the way. She did what I could not do. What I was never trained to do. She saved every single person in this room. The applause started slowly, then built to a thunderous roar. People stood. They clapped for several minutes. Many were crying openly. Sarah stood at the back, overwhelmed by the emotion. She had saved these people. She had used every skill she had ever learned. Every hour of training, every ounce of experience. And it had been enough. Barely, but enough. When the applause finally died down, Sarah walked to the front. Hayes handed her the microphone. She looked out at the crowd of survivors. At the faces of people she had saved. People who had been given a second chance at life because of her actions. 1 year ago, I was trying to be invisible, she began, her voice steady. I was trying to blend in. To be just another passenger. I had spent 3 years hiding who I used to be. Hiding my military service.my training.my experience. I thought that part of my life was over. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But Flight 1847 taught me something. You can't hide from who you really are. Your training, your experience, your capabilities, they're part of you. And when crisis comes, when people need help, you have to step forward. Even if it means exposing yourself, even if it means giving up your anonymity. She looked around the room. I saved 153 lives that day. But I couldn't have done it alone. Captain Hayes made the hardest decision a pilot can make, he trusted someone else with his aircraft. First Officer Chen supported me perfectly, handling communications and systems while I flew. The air traffic controllers cleared the airspace and coordinated emergency response. The Colorado State Patrol stopped traffic on that highway. The paramedics and firefighters were there within minutes. Everyone played a role, Sarah continued. Everyone did their part. I just happened to have the specific training needed for that specific crisis. But that's true for all of us. We all have skills. We all have expertise. And we never know when our particular capabilities will be exactly what's needed to save lives. The room erupted in applause again. People rushed forward to thank Sarah personally. To shake her hand. To hug her. To tell her how their lives had changed because she had saved them. Sarah stood in the middle of it all, finally at peace with who she was. Fighter pilot, hero, expert. And just another person doing what needed to be done when the moment demanded it. Sarah became center of intense media attention. News crews tracked her down. Reporters called constantly. Magazines wanted interviews. Talk shows wanted appearances. She declined most. She gave one brief press conference explaining what happened in technical terms. She praised Hayes and Chen's professionalism. She thanked air traffic controllers and emergency responders. She emphasized she'd simply done what her training prepared her to do. But media wanted a hero story. They dug into her military record. Found old squadron mates who told stories of her legendary skill. Found mission reports from combat deployments where she'd saved other pilots' lives. Her call sign, Viper, became famous. T-shirts appeared online. Memes spread across social media. Through it all, Sarah remained uncomfortable with attention. She hadn't landed that aircraft for glory. She'd done it because people needed help and she had the skills to provide it. 6 months later, the Air Force reached out. They wanted her to return, not to active flight duty, but to a training role. They wanted her to develop new emergency procedures for military pilots transitioning to civilian aviation. They wanted her to teach commercial pilots tactical flying techniques that could save lives in extreme situations. Sarah considered carefully. For 3 years she'd run away from her military identity. Tried to leave it behind completely. But Flight 1847 showed her she couldn't separate herself from her training and experience. It was part of who she was. Trying to hide it had been a mistake. She accepted the position. She would work part-time. Develop curriculum. Teach. Consult on aviation safety. And continue living civilian life. But she would no longer hide who she'd been. She would integrate both identities. Fighter pilot and ordinary person, expert and civilian. Visible and invisible as situations required. Nobody knew she used to be a fighter pilot, until she saved the Boeing 737. That sentence would be written in hundreds of news articles. Appear in aviation textbooks. Referenced in training manuals. But for Sarah Mitchell, it represented something more personal. It represented the moment she stopped hiding. The moment she accepted who she truly was. She'd spent 3 years trying to be invisible. Trying to leave her fighter pilot identity behind, trying to be just another passenger on just another flight. But when crisis came, when lives were at stake, she'd stepped forward. She'd revealed herself. She'd used every skill she possessed to save 153 people. And in doing so, she'd learned a fundamental truth. You cannot separate yourself from your capabilities. From your training, from your experience. They are part of who you are. The world needs experts. It needs people willing to step forward when others cannot. It needs the quiet heroes sitting in seats like 14F, invisible until the moment they're desperately needed. Sarah Mitchell was one of those heroes. And her story would inspire others to embrace their own expertise. To not hide their capabilities. To be ready to help when the moment arrived. Because you never know when an ordinary flight will become extraordinary, when routine will become crisis. When the quiet passenger nobody notices will become the person everyone needs. Nobody knew she used to be a fighter pilot, until she saved the Boeing 737. But now everyone knows. And that's exactly how it should be.